Okay, I'm Ben Johnston. I come from Princeton University. I work at what's called the McGraw Center for Teaching and Learning there. Next door, there's a presentation going on right now called Managing a Gigantic Multi-Site Installation. And this is decidedly not gigantic. This is a project that you might even call modest. It's an online textbook. It's a collaboration between the center I work in, the Teaching and Learning Center, and the Department of Spanish and Portuguese. And it's a bit different. It's a bit of an odd duck in this conference. When I applied to do this talk, I actually said, I'd like to do this talk because it's the type of talk I'd like to see more of. Hopefully, some of you agree, but it's a bit of an odd duck. I say that mainly because it's coming more to WordPress from the user's perspective than from the administrator's perspective. This is a project that we built and debuted in this last year. So it's been in use in Spanish courses at Princeton University for 1 year now. And it's a brief case study from the user side. What instructors really want to do. In my job as an educational technologist at a teaching and learning center, I work closely with faculty to try to develop and build mostly custom applications to fulfill whatever their teaching goals are. So this is a prime example of that kind of thing, and I think it's a good example of WordPress being used creatively for teaching purposes, for teaching and learning. It's also interesting, somewhat in the same ways that MOOCs and flipped learning are interesting right now. This is a textbook, clearly, but some of the ideas are the same, especially in that teachers are coming up with new ideas to kind of flip and play with old traditional themes of teaching. With MOOCs and flipped teaching, it's more with the lecture. And here, it's a little bit more with the textbook, obviously. And you might say, well, what's the big deal with the textbook? There's nothing wrong with textbooks, and that's true. I have to say that because I work at the McGraw Center for Teaching. And it is Harold McGraw, who was one of the founders of McGraw-Hill. And they make excellent textbooks. You might say, what's the big deal? It's just a textbook, right? And there are companies that scan textbooks and put them online and slash the price of textbooks. And that's all well and good. But like lectures, there was nothing wrong with the lecture, right? Flipping a classroom doesn't take away the lecture. It puts it in a different format. It plays with it a little bit. So the instructors from the Spanish and Portuguese department applied to a grant with the McGraw Center for Teaching and Learning, and we came up with this idea for a textbook that they would author themselves. I'll say a little bit about the McGraw Center, just to talk about what we do. We do all sorts of things. We do tutoring, we do teaching initiatives, the English language program. We do online teaching and learning, which is MOOCs with edX. And my department is the educational technologies part. And as I said, we're mostly grant-driven, so faculty members will come to us with ideas for those projects. We'll approve those projects, give them a small stipend so they can work during the summer and develop something around it. It's not all technology-driven, it's all sorts of things. But we're focused on building collaborative, constructive, and I mean constructive in the educational theory type sense, and creative projects. What some might call blended learning, I would tend to call project-based learning, right? Where we're getting students to use technology in order to make something or to do something, rather than simply to transmit instruction. That's a bit of a tough fit for a textbook, because a textbook is, by definition, a mode of instruction. So what we did was maybe not revolutionary, but it shows that we came to the idea of a textbook with that in mind. And how can we change it up a little bit? what we came up with is this textbook called Aprendo. That is an instructor-written textbook. All the modules in the textbook are written by the 13 or so instructors who teach Spanish. It's used in Spanish 101, 103, 107, and that makes up about 500 students in total. And Princeton University is actually a fairly small school. We have a little over 5,000 undergraduate students. And so if you do the math, that's 1 in 10 students you pass in the street is using this textbook. Cool. That's a bit nerve-wracking, right? So in terms of impact, the work I do, that's pretty big. So as I said, there's 13 instructors, 28 sections. Spanish is a very, very popular language. At the bottom I wrote, this is not OER. OER stands for Open Educational Resources, which is terrific. Great idea, but this is not it. This is kind of the opposite, actually. This is tailored instruction just for Princeton students. When I say that, it sounds very elitist, but it's, there's some educational merit to that, and it's not a MOOC. So why put a textbook online? I think that's fairly simple. You want it to be media rich, that a book can't do. You want it to be linked to authentic resources out on the web, which is especially true of the language teaching, because you want to use up-to-date, current cultural materials in your teaching. And an online format allows you to add those into your curriculum very easily. You want it to be live, so that if something happens in the world, in a Spanish-speaking country, you can add that to the curriculum immediately. It becomes part of the textbook. The costs, that was a major issue. If any of you teach, you know textbooks can be extremely expensive, and that's especially true with language textbooks. The textbooks we used to use at Princeton in Spanish, which I won't mention, was $190. And there's some add-ons as well. So that's really a big drain. And in these days, we're talking about diversity on campus, not just in terms of gender and religion, but also economic diversity. Princeton's investing a lot to widen the economic diversity of the student body in the undergraduate class. So there are students there who are really pained by the price of a $200 textbook. We're also interested in a common experience, or what we would say is a community of practice. Students having the same experience in a class, an experience that they wouldn't find at another university. And a site such as WordPress also gives us the chance to implement discussion in and out of the classroom along with and in amongst the curriculum. There are some plugins that I chose to add to WordPress in order to make this happen, some existing plugins, and I wrote some custom plugins. So for authentication, for example, we live and die by WPCampus. We have a central authentication system. That plugin is the spine of everything we do at Princeton University. User groups is another plugin that allows us to create groups of students that are the sections of the course. We remove dashboard access, of course, so students can log in and be redirected to the front of the website. And then I would say also we're working with normal people. The instructors are not interested in web development at all, right? First thing they wanted was a tables plugin so they could add tables to WordPress. They're real people, right? They want printing. Oh, what a headache printing has been, right? Especially when you have text in the text boxes. It doesn't print properly. And then there were some needs that had to be filled by, or I believe they had to be filled by some custom work that I did. We wanted this to be a workbook, so students would fill out the textbook as the course progressed, and their answers would be saved in the workbook, so that when they come back, all their answers are there. And when you do that, you can then extract information about that and get statistics about how much students have completed in the textbook. So here's a screenshot showing two of the areas that I did custom work on. That book icon in the top right is the vocabulary section. And the numbers, you see the sections under vocabulario. On the right-hand side, there's numbers that indicate how much of that section a student has completed. So here's a screenshot of the vocabulario page. This is another example of having to work with real people. They had vocabulary lists, massive vocabulary lists, and they're canonical. They know exactly what vocabulary they want their introductory Spanish students to learn. But they keep them in Google Docs. Actually, they kept them in Excel, and I said, please use Google Docs so that I can pull that data automatically from Google Docs and feed it into the website. And when you do that, it's not a very WordPressy approach. I'm really using Google Docs as the kind of data store. But when you do that, you can do all sorts of things. You can slice and dice that vocabulary up. Here it's for Unit 2, so I'm just pulling the vocabulary for Unit 2. Imprimir is print again. You can take smaller sections of them and generate, this is a flashcard program that we added to the textbook. And so you can slice and dice that data however you want, and you can make lists for export if students want to use those in other flashcard programs or things like that. So that's a vocabulary section of the site. The other portion is the responses section of the site. Again, you see the numbers on the right-hand side indicates how much I completed, my fake completions of those. So here's an example unit. Students go through about 2 or 3 of these units every week, and you see the text box at the bottom. That information is submitted by the student. There's a save button on the page, but we also do a background save every 5 seconds. And when the student returns, that's still there. That's not the way the web is supposed to work. So it takes a little bit of tinkering, but I think that's an essential component. Similarly, you have these drop-down boxes that the students can choose, and they're repopulated when they come back to the site. So how do instructors who are, I don't like the term tech savvy, but they're not interested in technology at all, how do we get them to do that? Oh, I should say, this is the Informes page. This is the site, the page that gives them feedback on how much a student has done. So you see the drop downs at the top. They could choose a section of a unit and section of the website, and it gives this chart of how many of the responses the student has filled out. 2 minutes. And a list of student names on the left-hand side. Please don't look too closely. They can click on those and go to a page that's populated with those students' answers. So how do you do that? Short codes. I suggested short codes to them, and there was immediate revulsion. Because it has the word code in it. So I added some buttons to the editor to insert the codes. But it is short codes, basically. Right? And you can see some of they make perfect sense, I think. Right? Text inserts a text box of any given size. Text area. Radio puts a radio button drop down. Check boxes. And a drop down. And they can put the options in there. And the plus and the star or asterisk, they're able to indicate which is the correct answer. The students are given feedback on that. Here's a screenshot of the editor where I've added some buttons to the top to further ease the insertion of these shortcodes. I can't make it any easier, right? In addition to some specialized links, link types that they wanted added, so that if the vocabulary item appears on the page, they can link it to a Google Images page of that idea. And so they're not explicitly told the definition of the word, rather they're given an image of them. The repopulation, last slide, repopulation is done with the fantastic WordPress REST API. When a student comes back to the page, we discover who they are because we've used the wonderful WPCampus plugin, and we go to a database saying, give me all the answers for this page for this student, and repopulate all those form elements. When I break it down to one sentence, it sounds very easy. But it's worked very well, and we have plans to continue using this textbook for years and years to come. Thank you very much.